My son locked us in the darkness and laughed. My husband collapsed, sobbing. I held his shoulder and whispered, "Stop. They forgot who poured the concrete for this foundation." That rusted box in the wall had been waiting 40 years for this moment. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. I walked to the rough stone wall in the darkest corner. The basement smelled like mold and old paint, the same smell from 1984 when Frank and I finished this room with our own hands. My fingers found the loose stone near the floor, third from the left, exactly where I'd placed it 4 decades ago. Frank was still crying. The sound broke something inside me, hearing my husband of 47 years reduced to this. Upstairs, I could hear them laughing. Dennis, Brenda, their friends, the Thanksgiving dinner continuing without us. "Ruth," Frank whispered, "what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I pried the stone loose and set it on the cold floor. Behind it sat a metal box, heavy with rust and secrets. I hadn't touched it since the day we moved in. The lock was frozen with age. I used a screwdriver from Frank's old workbench to break it open. Inside, wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with time, were the documents I'd hidden when I was 28 years old. The original deed to this house, in my name only, Ruth Coleman. "What is that?" Frank asked, his voice still shaking. "Insurance," I said. "I never told you because I never thought we'd need it." The footsteps above us were heavy. Someone was dancing. I heard Brenda's high-pitched laugh, the one she used when she wanted everyone to know she was having a wonderful time. My daughter-in-law had suggested this basement trip. "Show everyone where you used to store the Christmas decorations, Ruth. Dennis will help you carry them up." Dennis had helped, all right. Helped push us down the stairs and lock the door behind us. "It's just a joke, Mom," he'd called through the wood. "Loosen up. We'll let you out in an hour." That was 3 hours ago. Frank sat on an overturned bucket, his face gray in the dim light from the single basement window. At 70, he looked older than he had that morning. The betrayal had aged him in hours. I spread the documents on the workbench, the deed, the original survey, the receipts for every bag of cement, every 2x4, every nail we'd driven into this house. I'd kept them all. In 1984, my father died and left me $47,000. It was the most money anyone in my family had ever seen. Frank wanted to invest it, maybe start a business. But I'd grown up poor in a rented apartment where the landlord could throw us out whenever he pleased. I wanted something that couldn't be taken away. We bought the land for $12,000. Frank didn't have a job then. The plant had closed 6 months earlier, so the bank wouldn't give us a mortgage. I paid cash for the lot and we built the house ourselves, me and Frank, working nights and weekends for 2 years. I mixed the concrete. I carried the cinder blocks. I learned to wire outlets and hang drywall. My hands still carry the scars from that work, thin white lines across my palms that never faded. Frank thought we'd put the deed in both our names, but I'd gone to the county recorder alone the day after we finished the foundation. I told myself it was just in case something happened to our marriage. I was 28 and I'd seen too many women lose everything in divorces. I wanted one thing that was mine. I never told him. Never told anyone. "Ruth," Frank's voice was steadier now. "Why do you have those papers?" "Because I don't trust banks. Never have." He looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Curiosity. "What else is in that box?" I pulled out the other documents. A life insurance policy worth $500,000, purchased in 1995 when Dennis was 13. The beneficiary was listed as Dennis Coleman. I'd meant to change it a dozen times over the years, but paperwork always seemed like something I could do tomorrow. Now, tomorrow had arrived. "I need to make some changes," I said quietly. Upstairs, the music got louder. I recognized the song, something Dennis used to play as a teenager, back when he still hugged me hello and called me Mom instead of Ruth. That boy had disappeared somewhere along the way. Brenda had arrived in his life 12 years ago, beautiful and sharp-edged, and piece by piece she'd carved away everything soft in my son. Now he locked his parents in basements and called it a joke. I thought about the money. Dennis owed money. I'd overheard enough whispered phone calls to know that. Brenda's spending had never matched their income. The new cars every 2 years. The vacations to places I'd never heard of. The house in the suburbs that was twice the size they needed. Someone was paying for all that, and it wasn't their salaries. "Frank," I said, "when's the last time Dennis asked you for money?" My husband's face tightened. "Last month. Said they needed help with property taxes." "How much?" "8,000. I closed my eyes. "And before that?" "June. 12,000 for car repairs." He paused. "And April. 15,000 for Scott's tuition." Scott was our grandson, 19 years old and studying pre-law at Ohio State. He was the only good thing Dennis had produced in 42 years of living. "Did you ask Scott about that tuition money?" Frank shook his head. "Dennis said not to mention it. Said Scott was embarrassed about needing help. But Scott had a full scholarship. I knew because I'd gone to his high school graduation, sat in the front row while Brenda tried to seat me in the back. I'd heard the principal announce it. Full ride. 4 years. Dennis had taken $15,000 for tuition that didn't exist. I looked at the life insurance policy in my hands. $500,000, payable to my son upon my death. I thought about the way Brenda had looked at me lately, that calculating glance when she thought I wasn't watching. I thought about the doctor's appointment she'd scheduled for me next week, the one she insisted I attend, just to make sure everything's okay up here, she'd said, tapping her temple. They were planning something. I could feel it like a change in weather. The basement door opened suddenly, flooding the room with light. Scott stood at the top of the stairs, his face tight with anger. "Grandma? Grandpa? What the hell are you doing down here?" "Your father locked us in," Frank said. Scott's expression shifted from confusion to fury. "He what?" "It was a joke," I said, echoing Dennis's words. "Apparently." My grandson came down the stairs 2 at a time. He was tall like his father had been at that age, before the drinking softened Dennis's edges. But Scott had my eyes. Sharp, watchful, missing nothing. "I just got here," he said. "Mom said you were resting in the guest room. I came looking for you when—" He stopped, noticing the papers spread across the workbench. "What's all this?" I gathered the documents quickly, but not quickly enough. Scott had seen the deed, the insurance policy, the yellowed receipts. "Grandma," he said slowly, "why were you hiding in the basement with the deed to your house?" I looked at my grandson, this boy who'd spent summers with me learning to garden, who'd called me every Sunday since he left for college, who'd stood up to his mother once when she'd tried to seat me at the children's table during Christmas dinner. "Scott," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." He nodded. "Your tuition. Who pays for it?" His face hardened. "I have a scholarship. Full ride. Dad knows that." He paused. "Why?" I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Your father told Grandpa he gave you $15,000 in April. For tuition." Scott was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very controlled. "Grandma. Grandpa. I think we need to have a serious conversation about what's been happening in this family." Upstairs, the music kept playing. Brenda laughed again, that sharp, brittle sound. But down here in the darkness, surrounded by the walls I'd built with my own hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt awake. Scott drove us home that night in silence. Frank sat in the back seat, his face pressed against the window like a child who'd seen something he couldn't understand. I held the metal box on my lap, the documents safely inside. "I'm going to ask Dad about the money," Scott said as he pulled into our driveway. "Tomorrow, face to face." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Not yet." Scott looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Grandma, if he's been stealing from you, I need to know how much, and I need to know why." I paused. "Your mother. What do you know about their finances?" My grandson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "They're in trouble. I've known for a while. Mom's been selling jewelry online. I saw the shipping labels. Dad's phone rings at weird hours, and he always goes to another room to answer." "Debt collectors?" "Maybe, or worse." Scott turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. "Grandma, 6 months ago Mom asked me to co-sign a loan. $20,000. She said it was for home repairs. My stomach dropped. Did you sign? I told her I couldn't risk my credit while I was still in school. He paused. She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after that. Frank stirred in the back seat. What kind of trouble are they in, Scotty? I don't know exactly, but Dad's been different this past year. Nervous. He checks his phone constantly, like he's waiting for something bad to happen. Scott finally looked at us directly. I think he might be gambling. The word hung in the air. I thought about Dennis as a boy, the way he'd bet on anything. Card games, sports, even which raindrop would reach the bottom of the window first. Frank had laughed at it then, called it competitive spirit. Online poker, Scott continued. I saw it on his laptop once when I visited. He closed the tab fast, but I saw enough. He had thousands of dollars in the pot. Thousands of dollars. I thought about the $8,000 for property taxes, the $12,000 for car repairs, the $15,000 for fake tuition, $35,000 in the past year alone, and that was just what Frank knew about. Take us inside, I said. I need to make some phone calls in the morning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Frank snored beside me, exhausted by the day's betrayals, but my mind raced through numbers and dates. I got up at 3 a.m. and went through our bank statements at the kitchen table. The pattern was obvious once I looked for it. Every 3 or 4 months, a withdrawal, sometimes from our savings, sometimes from the checking account, always when Frank was the one who'd been to the bank. My husband's memory wasn't what it used to be. He'd sign whatever the teller put in front of him, trust whatever Dennis told him. The total over the past 5 years, $187,000, nearly $200,000, gone. I sat at the table until dawn, watching the numbers blur and sharpen as tears came and went. My son had stolen from us methodically, patiently, like a termite eating a house from the inside. And I'd let him. I'd noticed the missing money before, questioned Frank about it, accepted his confused explanations. I'd wanted to believe. I'd needed to believe that my son loved me more than he loved money. The phone rang at 7 a.m. I knew before I answered that it would be Brenda. Ruth! Her voice was bright, aggressive cheerfulness. I'm so glad you're up. Listen, about last night, Dennis feels terrible. He didn't realize you'd be down there so long. You know how he gets when he's been drinking. He was sober, I said. A pause. Well, anyway, I wanted to remind you about that doctor's appointment on Tuesday. Hendricks, remember? Just a little cognitive evaluation. Standard stuff for someone your age. Cognitive evaluation. I let the word settle. I didn't schedule any appointment, Brenda. Oh, I took care of it. Dennis and I thought it would be easier if I handled the details. You know how confusing insurance paperwork can be, she laughed. That brittle sound. Hendricks is wonderful, very thorough. He'll just ask you some questions, check your memory, that kind of thing. I understood then. The locked basement, the doctor's appointment, the way Brenda had been watching me lately, noting every time I forgot a word or misplaced my keys. They were building a case. Brenda, I said carefully, why do you think I need a cognitive evaluation? Ruth, honey, no one's saying there's anything wrong. But you have been a little forgetful lately. And that story you told at Thanksgiving about building this house yourself, we were all a little worried. I did build this house myself, with Frank. Of course you did, sweetie. Her voice dripped with false comfort. That's exactly what we'll tell Dr. Hendricks. After she hung up, I called the county recorder's office. A woman named Maria pulled up our property records and read them to me over the phone. The deed was still in my name alone, just as I'd filed it 40 years ago. But there was something else. Mrs. Coleman, it looks like there's a lien on the property, filed about 8 months ago. A home equity line of credit secured against the house. In whose name? The borrower is listed as Ruth A. Coleman. The amount is $175,000. I gripped the phone hard enough to hurt. I never took out any line of credit. I can only tell you what's in the records, ma'am. The loan was originated through First Federal Bank of Dayton. You'd need to contact them directly for more information. After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. The morning light crept across the kitchen table, illuminating the bank statements I'd spread there overnight. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder I'd filled every day for 30 years. They'd forged my signature, taken out $175,000 against my house, my father's gift, the foundation I'd poured with my own hands, and they were planning to have me declared incompetent so I couldn't fight back. I picked up the phone again and called Scott. "Grandma, it's 7 in the morning. I need you to find me a lawyer, someone who handles elder abuse cases." My voice was steady, surprising even me. "And Scott, don't tell your parents you're helping me." Silence on the line. Then, what did they do? They forged my name on a loan, $175,000, against my house. I heard Scott's breath catch. Jesus Christ. The cognitive evaluation Brenda scheduled. It's not because she's worried about me. It's because she wants to have me declared incompetent. If I can't manage my own affairs, Dennis gets power of attorney. He can sell this house and I can't stop him. Scott stopped. Started again. "Grandma, that's criminal. That's fraud and elder abuse and—" "I know what it is. That's why I need a lawyer." I paused. "Your father is my son. I changed his diapers. I sat up with him when he had nightmares. I worked double shifts so he could go to college." My voice cracked but held. "And now he's trying to steal everything I have before I die. What do you need me to do?" "Find me a lawyer, a good one. And Scott, I need you to get something from your parents' house. In Dennis's office, there's a filing cabinet. Gray metal, bottom drawer. I need whatever's in there about their finances. Credit card statements, loan documents, anything. You want me to steal from them? I want you to help me understand what I'm dealing with." I looked out the window at the cardinal, at the yard I'd landscaped myself, at the fence Frank and I had built the summer Dennis turned 10. "They're going to come for this house, Scott. The house I built. The only thing my father ever gave me. I'll find you a lawyer," Scott said. "And Grandma, I'll get those documents. Whatever it takes." 2 days later, Scott arrived at my door with a cardboard box full of papers and an expression I'd never seen on his young face. Disgust mixed with sorrow. "It's worse than you thought," he said. We spread the documents across my dining room table. Credit card statements showing $83,000 in debt across 5 cards. A second mortgage on Dennis and Brenda's house that I hadn't known existed. Collection notices from 3 different agencies. And worst of all, a ledger in Dennis's handwriting, meticulously tracking every dollar he'd taken from us. The total, $212,000 over 7 years. But it was the last page of the ledger that stopped my heart. A list written in Brenda's neat script. Ruth's assets. House, estimated value $340,000. Life insurance, $500,000. Savings, estimated $45,000. Social Security, $2,100 a month. Timeline, cognitive eval. November, POA filing. December. List house, January. Insurance review, March. They'd written it all down. Their plan to strip me of everything I owned, laid out like a business proposal. Scott pointed to the last item. Insurance review. What do you think that means? I thought about my life insurance policy. $500,000. Payable to Dennis upon my death. I think, I said slowly, it means they're waiting for me to die. Scott's face went pale. Grandma, you don't think they'd— I don't know what I think anymore. I gathered the papers carefully. But I'm going to find out. And I'm going to stop them. The lawyer's name was Patricia Webb. She was 53 years old, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen every kind of family betrayal. "Mrs. Coleman," she said, looking up from the documents Scott had gathered. "You have grounds for criminal charges, fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse. We could have your son arrested tomorrow." I sat in her office, a comfortable room on the 3rd floor of a downtown Dayton building, and thought about Dennis in handcuffs. My son, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. What are my other options? Patricia leaned back in her chair. You could pursue civil remedies, sue to recover the stolen funds, get the fraudulent loan discharged, file for a restraining order if you believe they pose a physical threat. I don't want him in jail. Then we build a protective wall around your assets. First, we need to change the beneficiary on that life insurance policy. Today, if possible. Second, We need to secure your house. The forged loan can be challenged, but it takes time. Third, we create a trust that protects your remaining assets from creditors and predatory family members. Predatory family members. I thought about Brenda's checklist, that neat timeline for stripping me of everything. How much will this cost? My retainer is $5,000. Total fees will depend on how aggressively your son fights back. She paused. Mrs. Coleman, I have to ask. Are you certain you want to proceed? These cases tear families apart. I looked at my hands, the scars from 40 years ago when I'd mixed concrete until they bled. My family is already torn apart, I said. I'm just trying to survive the pieces. That afternoon, I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. Dennis's name came off. Scott's name went on. $500,000. Enough to pay off his student loans, buy a house, start a life. Enough to give my grandson what my son had tried to steal. The insurance company required a notarized form. Scott drove me to a UPS store where a bored teenager stamped the document without looking up from her phone. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. We were halfway home when my phone rang. Frank's number. Ruth. His voice was strange, stretched thin. Ruth, I don't feel good. Where are you? Kitchen. I was making tea and everything went. Ruth. My arm hurts. My chest. Don't move. I'm calling 911. The ambulance arrived before we did. By the time Scott pulled into the driveway, paramedics were loading Frank onto a stretcher, his face gray and sweating, an oxygen mask over his mouth. Heart attack, one of them told me. Mild, we think, but we need to get him to the hospital. I rode in the ambulance holding Frank's hand. His fingers squeezed mine weakly, then went slack. The monitor beeped steadily, each sound a small promise that he was still alive. At the hospital, they rushed him into a treatment room and told me to wait. I sat in a plastic chair in the cardiac unit hallway, staring at a water stain on the ceiling, and waited. Scott arrived 20 minutes later with coffee I couldn't drink. We sat together in silence while doctors and nurses moved past us with urgent purpose. At 4 p.m., a cardiologist named Dr. Mehta came to find me. Mrs. Coleman, your husband is stable. It was a minor heart attack, what we call an STEMI. We'll need to keep him for observation, probably run some more tests, but I expect him to make a full recovery. Relief flooded through me. So intense it felt like drowning. Can I see him? In a few minutes. We're getting him settled in a room. Dr. Mehta hesitated. Mrs. Coleman, has your husband been under unusual stress lately? Heart attacks often have an emotional trigger. I thought about the basement, the betrayals, the documents scattered across our dining room table. Yes, I said, he has. They let me into Frank's room at 5:30. He lay in a narrow bed surrounded by machines, looking small and old and fragile. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Ruth. You have nothing to be sorry for. I let them take our money. I signed things I shouldn't have signed. I didn't protect you. I sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand. We're going to be fine. I've hired a lawyer. She's going to help us. Dennis called. Frank's voice was barely a whisper. While you were in the waiting room, he wanted to know which hospital. My chest tightened. What did you tell him? I didn't answer. I couldn't. He broke off, fresh tears sliding down his weathered cheeks. He's our son, Ruth. How did we raise a son who would do this to us? I had no answer. I'd asked myself the same question 1,000 times in the past week. At 7 p.m., I sent Scott home. You have classes tomorrow. I'll stay with Grandpa tonight. Grandma, I can miss one day. I'll call if anything changes. After he left, I settled into the reclining chair by Frank's bed. The hospital quieted around us, the bustle of visiting hours fading into the hushed efficiency of the night shift. Frank slept, his breathing steady, his hand still holding mine. At 9:30, my phone buzzed. A text from Dennis. Heard Dad's in the hospital. Mom, we should talk. I can explain everything. I stared at the message for a long time. My son wanted to explain. Explain the $212,000 he'd stolen. Explain the forged loan. Explain the plan to have me declared incompetent. I typed back, Your father needs rest. We'll talk later. His response came immediately. Please, Mom. I know I messed up, but it's not what you think. Brenda found some things and she's upset. We need to figure this out as a family. As a family. I almost laughed. What family? The family that locked me in a basement? The family that forged my name on legal documents? The family that was waiting for me to die so they could collect my insurance? I turned off my phone and watched Frank sleep. At midnight, a nurse came to check his vitals. Young woman, couldn't have been older than 25, with kind eyes and gentle hands. You should get some rest, Mrs. Coleman. Your husband's doing well. I'll rest when I'm dead. She smiled sadly. I hear that a lot in here. After she left, I thought about those words. I'll rest when I'm dead. Dennis and Brenda were certainly counting on that. But I wasn't ready. I had a house to protect, a grandson to provide for, a husband to take care of. I had 40 more years of life insurance to fund, 40 more bird feeders to fill, 40 more gardens to tend. I wasn't done yet. Frank's phone rang at 6 a.m. He was awake by then, groggy but alert, eating the bland breakfast the hospital had provided. He looked at the screen and his face changed. Dennis, he said, don't answer it. But Frank was already pressing the button. Hello? Son? I could hear Dennis's voice, tinny through the phone speaker. Frantic, words tumbling over each other. Dad, listen, I know you're upset, but you have to understand. I was trying to help. The money was going to come back. I had a system, Dad. It was working, but then… Dennis. Frank's voice was very quiet. Are you telling me you gambled away our retirement? Silence on the line. I was going to pay it back. Every penny. I just needed time. $200,000. You stole $200,000 from your mother and me. Not stole, Dad. Borrowed. I was always going to… Brenda made a list. Frank's hand was shaking now. A timeline. For when Mom died. For selling the house. The silence stretched longer this time. That wasn't… Dad, you don't understand what kind of pressure we've been under. I understand perfectly. Frank's voice broke. I understand that my son looked at his mother and saw a wallet. I understand that my daughter-in-law looked at her and saw a life insurance payout. Dad, don't call again. Frank dropped the phone on the bed like it had burned him. Don't visit. Don't come to the hospital. You're not welcome. He started crying again. Harsh sobs that shook his whole body. I held him while the machines beeped and the morning light crept through the hospital blinds, and I felt something inside me harden into stone. My son was not going to change. My son was not going to be redeemed. My son had chosen money over family, and no amount of tears or explanations would undo that choice. All I could do now was protect what remained. Later that morning, after Frank had calmed down and eaten lunch and been praised by Dr. Mehta for his excellent vital signs, I stepped into the hallway to call Patricia Webb. I want to move faster, I said. Everything you mentioned, the trust, the loan challenge, the restraining order, I want it done this week. That's ambitious. We'll need to file multiple motions. My husband just had a heart attack because of the stress my son put us through. I'm done waiting. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. I want my family protected. Your family meaning… my husband, my grandson. I paused. That's all? That's everyone. And your son? I looked through the window into Frank's room. He was watching something on the small TV mounted on the wall, his face peaceful for the first time in days. I don't have a son, I said. Not anymore. Frank came home 4 days later with a bag of medications and a strict diet plan. I'd spent those 4 days preparing the house, preparing myself, preparing for war. Patricia Webb had been busy. The fraudulent loan was under investigation by First Federal Bank. They took forgery seriously, especially when it involved elder abuse. A restraining order was filed against Dennis and Brenda, prohibiting them from coming within 500 feet of our property. And the trust was established, protecting our remaining assets behind a wall of legal language that Dennis couldn't breach. It's not enough, Patricia told me during our last meeting. They still owe creditors. Some of those creditors might try to come after you, argue that you're financially entangled with your son. What do you suggest? Documentation. Everything you have that proves the money was stolen, not loaned. Bank records, that ledger Scott found. Anything showing your signature was forged. The more evidence we have, the stronger your defense. I thought about the metal box in my basement, the documents I'd hidden there 40 years ago. I'd been protecting myself even then, without knowing I'd need to. There's one more thing, I said. My son and his wife owe money to people who aren't banks. Dangerous people, I think. If they become desperate, I'll draft a letter to the local police, putting them on notice of potential harassment. And I'd recommend installing security cameras around your property. Patricia looked at me steadily. Mrs. Coleman, I have to ask again. Are you sure you don't want to pursue criminal charges? What your son did would put him in prison, and prison wouldn't bring back the money or fix what's broken. I stood to leave. I just want to be left alone, to live what's left of my life in peace. But peace was not on the menu. The calls started 3 days after Frank came home. Unknown numbers, always at odd hours. The caller never spoke, just heavy breathing, then silence, then the click of disconnection. The first time it happened, at 2 a.m., I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Frank snored beside me. The second time, at 6 a.m. the next morning, I started keeping a log. By the end of the week, I had 17 calls documented. Times, durations, phone numbers. Patricia filed them with the police and added them to our restraining order violation report. Then, the letters started arriving. Plain white envelopes, no return address, hand-delivered to our mailbox. The first one contained a single sheet of paper with 3 words, "You owe us." The second one had a photograph, our house, taken from the street, with an X drawn in red marker over the front door. The third one had numbers, $215,000, 2 weeks. They sold the debt, Patricia said when I showed her. Your son's gambling debts. Someone bought them at a discount, and now they're trying to collect from you. I don't owe anyone anything. You don't. But these people don't care about legal technicalities. They see a house worth $340,000 and an elderly couple who might be frightened into paying. I'm not frightened, I said. I'm angry. That night, Scott helped me install security cameras around the property. 4 of them, covering every approach to the house. We connected them to my phone so I could watch the feeds from anywhere. Grandma, Scott said as we tested the system, have you thought about what happens if they don't stop? They'll stop, but if they don't, then I have 40 years of evidence that this house is mine. I have a lawyer who knows elder abuse law better than anyone in the state, and I have a grandson who's going to be a lawyer himself someday. I looked at him directly. They picked the wrong old woman to threaten. Scott smiled, but his eyes were worried. What about Dad? Have you heard from him? He tried calling once. I didn't answer. I paused. Your father made his choices, Scott. I can't protect him from the consequences. I know, it's just... He shook his head. Never mind. Say it. He's still my father, even after everything. Part of me keeps hoping he'll wake up and realize what he's done. I thought about Dennis as a boy, bringing me wilted dandelions. Dennis as a teenager, sullen and secretive. Dennis as a man, taking money from the people who loved him without a shred of guilt. Some people don't wake up, I said. Some people keep making the same mistakes until the mistakes destroy them. And when that happens, then you grieve for who they could have been, and you move on. The cameras caught our first visitor 3 nights later. I was asleep when my phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected, front yard. I pulled up the feed and saw a figure standing at the edge of our property, just outside the range of the streetlight. Male, average height, dark clothes. He stood there for 30 seconds, staring at the house, then walked away. He came back the next night. And the night after that. Always the same time. 3 a.m. Always the same position. Watching. On the 4th night, I called the police. They sent a patrol car, but by the time it arrived, the man was gone. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but unhelpful. Without a direct threat or property damage, there's not much we can do. Keep documenting. Call us if he tries to approach the house. I didn't call the police the 5th night. Instead, I turned on every light in the house and sat in my rocking chair by the front window, watching the street. At 3 a.m., he appeared. Same spot, same posture. But this time, I was ready. I walked to the front door and opened it, stepped onto the porch, let him see me seeing him. I know who you are, I called out. My voice was steady, louder than I'd expected. I know what you want, and you're not getting it. The figure didn't move. This house is mine, has been for 40 years. It's not collateral for my son's mistakes, and it's never going to be. I took one step forward. I'm 70 years old. I've worked every day of my life. I've buried my parents, raised a child, built this home with my own hands. You think you can frighten me with midnight visits? Nothing. Just that dark shape at the edge of the light. Go back to whoever sent you. Tell them Ruth Coleman doesn't scare. Tell them if they want this house, they'll have to take it from my corpse. I smiled, feeling something wild and reckless rising in my chest. And maybe not even then. The figure turned and walked away. I watched until he disappeared around the corner, then went back inside and locked the door. The visits stopped after that. The calls continued for another week, then stopped too. Patricia theorized that the debt collectors had decided we weren't worth the trouble. Elderly couple, secured property, willing to fight. They'll move on to easier targets, she said. These people are predators. They look for weakness. They didn't find any here. They didn't. 2 weeks after the last threatening call, I got a different kind of message. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, but a voice I knew immediately. Brenda. Ruth, I don't know what you think you're doing, but it needs to stop. You've ruined our lives. Dennis can't work, can't eat, can't sleep. His own mother filed a restraining order against him. How do you think that looks to his employer? Her voice cracked with anger. You're going to drop this. All of it. The lawyer, the police reports, everything. Or I swear to God, Ruth, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you really are. I listened to the message 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Patricia. Interesting, my lawyer said when she called back. That sounds like a threat. And it definitely violates the restraining order. What can we do? File for contempt. If she contacts you again, we can have her arrested. Patricia paused. Mrs. Coleman, I think we should discuss next steps. Your son and his wife are drowning. The debt collectors are circling. Their house is probably going into foreclosure soon. When that happens, they're going to become more desperate, not less. What do you suggest? Let them hit bottom. Don't intervene, don't rescue, don't engage. Eventually, they'll have to face consequences, legal or financial or both. When that happens, you'll be protected. And if they try to drag us down with them, they can try. But you've got documentation going back 40 years. The deed to your house, the forged loan, the threatening letters. Any judge in the county would side with you. I hung up and went to find Frank. He was in the garden, pulling weeds with the careful movements Dr. Mehta had prescribed. Physical activity, but nothing strenuous. He looked up when I approached, and I saw the question in his eyes. They're not going to stop, I said. I know. The lawyer says to wait. Let them hit bottom. Frank nodded slowly. And Scott? What does he say? He wants his father to get help. Go to one of those gambling addiction meetings. Turn his life around. I sat on the garden bench, feeling the sun warm on my face. I told him some people don't turn around. You really believe that? I thought about the list Brenda had made, the timeline for my death, the insurance payout they were counting on. I believe that my son looked at me and saw money instead of a mother, and I believe that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. Frank was quiet for a long time. Then, I keep thinking about when he was little, when he'd crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. He was so scared of the lightning. He's not scared anymore. He's the lightning now. My husband turned back to his weeds, and I watched the birds gather at the feeder I'd filled that morning. Cardinals and sparrows and one bright blue jay, all of them surviving on what I provided. I would provide for the ones who deserved it. The rest would have to find their own way. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday in February, 3 months after Frank's heart attack. I found it folded inside our newspaper, placed there by a postal worker who'd made a mistake. Dennis and Brenda's house, sold at auction, new owners taking possession in 30 days. I should have felt satisfaction. This was karma, wasn't it? The natural consequence of their choices. But looking at that notice, I felt only a hollow exhaustion. They'll come here, Frank said when I showed him. They have nowhere else to go. The restraining order. Dennis won't care. He's desperate. Frank's hands shook as he set down his coffee. Ruth, what are we going to do? I didn't have an answer. So I called Patricia. They can't approach your property without violating the order, she reminded me. If they do, call the police immediately. And then what? They get arrested? Go to jail? Possibly. At minimum, they'd face contempt charges. Patricia paused. Mrs. Coleman, is that what you want? I stared out the window at the house I'd built with my own hands. The foundation I'd poured, the walls I'd raised, the life I'd constructed over 40 years of work and sacrifice. What I want, I said slowly, is for my son to have been a different person. Since that's not possible, I'll settle for being left alone. They came 3 days later, not to the house. Dennis wasn't that foolish. Instead, they intercepted Scott outside his apartment near campus. I heard about it an hour later when my grandson called with a voice like ground glass. They want a meeting. All of us, somewhere neutral. Dad says he has things to explain. There's nothing to explain. Grandma, he's a mess. I barely recognized him. He's lost weight. He's not sleeping. Mom left him. That stopped me. Brenda left? 2 weeks ago. Cleaned out what was left in their bank account and went to her sister's in Michigan. Dad's been living in his car. I thought about Brenda's checklist, the neat timeline for my destruction. She'd been the architect of this plan, and now she'd abandoned the rubble. That doesn't change anything, I said. I know. But Grandma... Scott's voice cracked. He's my father. I can't just watch him fall apart without trying. Trying what? I don't know. Something. Anything. A long pause. Will you meet with him? One time. Just to hear what he has to say. I should have said no. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, another manipulation, another attempt to pry open the wall I'd built around my heart. But Scott was asking. Scott, who had stood by me through everything. Scott, who deserved to at least try to save his father. One meeting, I said, in public, with you present. Thank you, Grandma. Don't thank me yet. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital where Frank had spent 4 days fighting to survive what Dennis had done to us. I chose the location deliberately. Let my son see where his choices had led. Frank refused to come. I can't look at him, he'd said that morning, his hands shaking. I don't trust myself, so it was just me and Scott at a corner table when Dennis walked in. My son had aged 10 years in 3 months. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost 30 pounds. His hair was gray at the temples, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless regret, or maybe just fear. It was hard to tell the difference. Mom, he stopped a few feet from the table, uncertain whether to approach. Thank you for meeting me. Sit down, I said. Say what you need to say. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table like a penitent in confession. Up close, I could see the tremor in his fingers, the broken capillaries in his cheeks from drinking too much. I don't know where to start. Try the beginning. Try the first time you decided to steal from your parents. Dennis flinched. It wasn't like that. Not at first. The first time I really did need help. The mortgage was late. We were going to lose the house. So you lied to your father and took his money. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. With what? Your gambling winnings? The words hit him like a slap. He looked down at his hands, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. The gambling started later, after I'd already taken the first loan. I thought if I could just win enough, I could pay everyone back and no one would know. But you didn't win. No. And instead of stopping, you kept taking, kept lying, kept building that hole deeper and deeper. Yes. I leaned forward. Tell me about Brenda's list, the timeline. Dennis's face went pale. You know about that? I know about everything. The forged loan, the cognitive evaluation, the insurance policy. I kept my voice steady, flat, emotionless. Your wife made a schedule for my death, Dennis. She wrote it down like a business plan. That was Brenda's idea. I never would have... Don't. The word came out sharper than I intended. Don't sit here and blame your wife for plans you participated in. You signed those forged documents. You scheduled that doctor's appointment. You locked your parents in a basement while you ate Thanksgiving dinner upstairs. Mom, I mixed the concrete for that basement. Did you know that? I was 28 years old, pregnant with you, and I mixed concrete until my hands bled because I wanted to give my family a home that couldn't be taken away. I felt something breaking inside me, something I'd held together through sheer will, and you tried to take it anyway. My own son, my own blood. Dennis was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Scott sat beside me, silent, watching his father crumble. "I'm sorry," Dennis whispered. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Sorry doesn't pay back $200,000. Sorry doesn't undo the heart attack your father had. Sorry doesn't rebuild 40 years of trust. I know it doesn't. He wiped his face with a napkin, leaving streaks of moisture on his cheeks. But I want to try. I'll go to GA meetings. I'll get a job, a real job, and pay back every penny, however long it takes. And what about the debt collectors? The people you owed money to who sent threatening letters to my house? Dennis's expression shifted. Fear. Raw and undisguised. I'm working on that. They've agreed to a payment plan. With what money? You have no job, no house, no wife. How exactly are you planning to pay them? I'll figure it out. Like you figured out how to pay back the money you stole from us? Like you figured out how to stop gambling before it destroyed everything? I shook my head. You don't figure things out, Dennis. You make promises you can't keep, and then you let other people clean up the mess. Mom, please. No. I stood up, and Scott rose with me. I've heard enough. You want forgiveness? Earn it. Not from me, I'm done. But maybe if you spend the next 20 years actually doing the work, actually changing, you might earn it from your son. I looked at Scott, saw the pain in his young face. Your grandson loves you. God knows why, but he does. Don't destroy that too. Dennis reached for my hand. Mom, wait. I pulled back before he could touch me. We're done, Dennis. Whatever you were to me, whatever we were to each other, that's over. I have a husband to take care of and a life to live, and I'm not going to spend what's left of it being your victim. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. The life insurance policy. I changed the beneficiary. It goes to Scott now. All of it. I watched Dennis's face as the words registered. The hope draining out, replaced by something like despair. You're not getting anything when I die, Dennis. Nothing. That's the consequence of what you did. I left him sitting there, crying into his coffee, a broken man at a corner table. Scott followed me out to the parking lot, neither of us speaking until we reached my car. Grandma, he said finally, that was necessary. I was going to say brutal. I turned to face my grandson. 19 years old, still young enough to believe people could change, still hopeful enough to see redemption where I saw only waste. Your father had every advantage, a family who loved him, parents who sacrificed for him, a son who still believes in him despite everything. I touched Scott's cheek gently. He threw it all away for poker chips and false hope. I can't forgive that. I won't, but he's still my father, yes. And you can love him if you choose. Visit him. Help him. I dropped my hand. But not with my money, not with my house, not with my forgiveness. Those are mine, and I'm keeping them. Scott was quiet for a long moment. Then, what happens now? Now I go home to your grandfather. I fill the bird feeders and weed the garden and live whatever life I have left. I opened my car door. And your father faces his consequences alone, the way he should have from the beginning. I drove home in silence, watching the familiar streets roll past. The coffee shop, the hospital, the neighborhood where I'd raised my son. 42 years of motherhood, and this was where it ended. A coffee shop conversation and a closed door. But some doors needed to be closed. Some people couldn't be saved, and I was done trying. Spring came early that year. By March, the crocuses were pushing through the soil beside the foundation I'd poured 4 decades ago. Purple and white and yellow, defiant splashes of color against the gray concrete. I knelt in the garden, pulling weeds with hands that remembered every callus, every blister, every drop of sweat that had gone into building this home. Frank sat on the porch behind me, reading the newspaper with his bifocals perched on his nose. His heart was stronger now, the doctors said. Something about confronting the truth being better than living with lies. Scott's car pulled into the driveway at noon. He came most Sundays now, bringing groceries and stories from law school and a kind of hope I'd forgotten existed. Grandma. He crossed the lawn and knelt beside me. You got a letter from the State Attorney General. I took the envelope, studied the official seal. What does the Attorney General want with me? Open it. The letter inside was 2 pages long, dense with legal language. I read it twice before the meaning became clear. Based on our investigation and the evidence provided, we have determined that Dennis Allen Coleman engaged in a pattern of financial exploitation against elderly victims. In addition to the charges related to Ruth Coleman, we have identified 3 other cases involving similar fraud schemes. Coleman has been indicted on 12 counts of elder financial abuse, 4 counts of forgery, and 2 counts of wire fraud. A trial date has been set for June 15th. I lowered the letter. Other victims. There were other victims. Scott nodded, his face tight. The investigation you started. It led them to other cases. Dad wasn't just stealing from you. He was running a scheme. I thought about my son in that coffee shop, crying and promising to change. The whole time, there had been other people, other elderly parents whose children had trusted Dennis Coleman with their money. How many? 3 that they've found so far. 2 widows in their 70s, 1 retired schoolteacher. How much did he take from them? Combined, about $400,000. Scott's voice was barely above a whisper. He targeted people who trusted him, people who reminded him of you. I sat back on my heels, feeling the damp earth seep through my gardening pants. My son had built an empire of exploitation on the foundation of what he'd learned stealing from his own parents. Every technique, every manipulation, every lie. He'd practiced on me first, then used those skills on strangers. The Attorney General wants you to testify, Scott said. At the trial, if you're willing. I looked at the letter again, at the names of the other victims. Margaret Holloway, 74. Pearl Washington, 71. Eugene Turner, 78. People like me. People who'd trusted their children, their families, their communities. People who'd been betrayed in the most intimate way possible. Yes, I said. I'll testify. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in the courtroom every day except one, watching my son face the consequences of his choices. Dennis had aged another decade since our meeting at the coffee shop. He sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit, his hands trembling as witness after witness described his manipulations. Margaret Holloway, who'd lost her late husband's pension to a fake investment scheme Dennis had created. Pearl Washington, whose home had been foreclosed after Dennis convinced her to sign over power of attorney. Eugene Turner, who'd given Dennis $150,000 to invest in a business that never existed. And then me. I took the stand on a Thursday morning in June, wearing the navy blue dress Frank had always liked. The prosecutor asked me to describe my relationship with my son, and I told them everything. The childhood, the love, the slow erosion of trust as money disappeared and explanations multiplied. Mrs. Coleman, the prosecutor said, can you describe the moment you realized your son was stealing from you? I looked at Dennis across the courtroom. He wouldn't meet my eyes. There wasn't one moment, I said. It was gradual, like a house settling on its foundation. You don't notice the cracks until the walls start to fall. And when did the walls start to fall? Thanksgiving. When my son locked me and my husband in the basement of the house I built with my own hands, so he could eat dinner without having to look at us. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a confused old woman, bitter and vindictive. He asked about my memory, my medications, my relationship with my daughter-in-law. I answered every question calmly and completely. Mrs. Coleman, he said finally, isn't it true that you've refused to speak to your son since February of this year? That's true. And isn't it also true that you changed the beneficiary of your life insurance policy specifically to hurt him? I changed it to protect my grandson. There's a difference, but the effect is the same. Your son will receive nothing when you die. I leaned forward slightly. The effect is that the money I earned over a lifetime of work will go to someone who deserves it, not to someone who was counting down the days until I was dead. The courtroom went quiet. The defense attorney looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. No further questions, he said. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Dennis was convicted on all 12 counts of elder financial abuse, all 4 counts of forgery, and 1 count of wire fraud. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 4. I didn't stay for the sentencing. By then, I'd seen enough of my son's face. Scott drove me home that afternoon, neither of us speaking until we pulled into the driveway. Frank was waiting on the porch, a glass of lemonade sweating in the June heat. "It's done," I told him. He nodded slowly. "How do you feel?" I thought about the question for a long time. How did I feel? Relieved? Vindicated? All of those things? And none of them. "I feel like I can finally tend my garden," I said, without looking over my shoulder. That summer was the most peaceful I'd known in years. Frank's health continued to improve. Scott graduated from his 2nd year of law school with honors, already talking about specializing in elder law. The house stood solid and quiet, the foundation as strong as the day I'd poured it. I filled the bird feeders every morning. I weeded the garden every afternoon. I sat on the porch with Frank every evening, watching the fireflies emerge as darkness fell. We didn't talk about Dennis. There was nothing left to say. In August, Scott brought a girl home for dinner. Her name was Rachel, and she was studying to be a social worker. She asked me about the house, and I told her the story, the inheritance, the concrete, the 40 years of building and protecting. "You did all that yourself?" she asked, eyes wide. "With Frank's help, but I mixed the concrete. I poured the foundation." I looked at my hands, the scars faded but still visible. Some things you have to build yourself, or they don't hold. Later that night, after Scott and Rachel had left and Frank had gone to bed, I walked down to the basement. I hadn't been there since Thanksgiving, since the night everything changed. The stone was back in its place, but the metal box was gone. I'd moved it upstairs, to a fireproof safe in my closet. The documents inside were too important to leave in a hole in the wall. But I stood there for a long time anyway, my hand against the rough stone, feeling the texture I remembered from 40 years ago. This wall had held secrets for decades. Now those secrets were out, and the wall remained standing. That was the thing about foundations. You could build anything on top of them. Families, fortunes, lives. But if the foundation was strong, truly strong, it could survive whatever collapsed above it. I climbed the stairs slowly, turning off the basement light. Behind me, the darkness settled back into place, comfortable and familiar. In the morning, I would fill the bird feeders. I would weed the garden. I would call Scott and ask about his classes. And I would not think about my son, alone in a cell somewhere, paying for choices I could never forgive. Some doors stay closed. Some walls never come down. Some foundations hold forever, even when everything built on top of them has crumbled to dust. I was 70 years old. I'd built this house with my own hands. I'd protected it against everyone who tried to take it from me. And I would die here, in my own time, surrounded by the people who truly loved me. That was enough. That was everything. The crocuses would bloom again next spring. I would be here to see them.